You can put it in front of you or hold it. Perfect. And then my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am here today with Dorothy Black, who graduated from SAIS in the class of 1966 and was in Bologna and finished her year there in 1965. And I'm an alumni relations officer at SAIS, and today's date is January 19th, 2011, and I really appreciate your spending some time with us today. And I just wanted to ask you a few questions. We'll just kind of have a conversation and kind of go down memory lane. So the first question just is, what brought you to SAIS originally? And I know that you started in Bologna, so maybe just talk about what your interests were and kind of what brought you to SAIS.
Okay. Well, I went to Stanford undergraduate, and when I came to Stanford, I was an international relations major, and the international relations was in the political science department at that time. I had an interest when I came to college in going overseas and traveling, working overseas, and I had gone to Stanford in France in my sophomore year. I spent 6 months in tour, and I absolutely loved Europe. I studied French, I traveled around, I was fascinated by other countries, other languages, and when I graduated I wanted to do a post-graduation degree, and I had applied to, I think, 3 schools. SAIS was one of them. I believe it was Fletcher and maybe American University, I can't remember. In any case, SAIS accepted me, but to go to Bologna for my first year, and I was delighted with that because I had loved France so much, and
That's so neat.
had kind of hoped that I would be able to do more studying in Europe. So I went to the 64-65 class of SAIS in Bologna, and then I came to Washington for my second year and got the 2-year master's.
And what got you interested in international relations when you were at Stanford? Like what sort of led to an interest there?
Well, I never really traveled much when I was a child. I grew up in California. But for some reason, I always had an interest in overseas. I do remember that I had an 8th grade math teacher, and she told our class one day that she had been, I guess, on a trip to Europe, and she'd had some kind of a problem, and she had gone to the American consulate, the American services, and they were so helpful, and she was so impressed with the people that were working there, and maybe that had some effect on me. I do remember it to this day, so it probably did.
That's great.
But I was always fascinated by other countries, and I loved geography, and I took French in high school, and I liked history, so.
And how was your Italian after you came back?
Well, I spoke a little bit of Italian, but at SAIS you have to do a proficiency exam, and since I'd already had a couple of years of French, and I'd lived in France when I was in Stanford, I decided to continue on with the French so I could finish my proficiency. So unfortunately my Italian wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be.
Oh, that's great.
But just living in the country and, kind of informally studying some of the grammar and things, I was certainly able to get along. And I went back last year to the Bologna reunion.
Oh, that's great. Terrific.
Whenever you go back, you kind of, things come back to you, and you remember words and phrases. So.
That's great. And did you get to travel around Italy a lot while you were there?
We did. Yeah, at SAIS in those days, we traveled, well, students would travel around Italy, I didn't have a car, but a number of the students did, so, we went to Florence, went to La Scala in Milan, I went to Ravenna on the beach, I went to Venice, went to Rome, So we did a lot of that traveling, and then we had 2 field trips.
Uh-huh.
And we had one field trip to the European communities. So we went up, to Brussels, Strasbourg. I think we went to Paris too. I think SHAPE was in Paris in those days, or maybe it was just leaving. But and then the second semester we had another field trip, but I can't remember exactly where it was.
That's neat. And do you have any other memories of being in Bologna? Do you have memories of, not anything specific, but professors or classes you took, or the student lounge, or sort of anything like that?
Oh, yes. Well, I have memories. In those days, we had the apartments in Via degli Orti, and there were a number of students. I mean, they had one whole side of an apartment house. I don't know if you've heard this from any of your other interviewees.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Oh, Via degli Orti was a great place, and they would put 4 students in each of the apartments. They were 2-bedroom apartments, and I think we had about 3 apartments of women, and the rest were men. And they tried to mix up, Americans and people from the other European countries. Now, in my case, I had 1 American roommate and 1 Austrian roommate, and the 4th roommate was American, but she came for about 2 weeks and then she dropped out of the school. So we only had 3 in our apartment, which was nice. But other apartments, my friends across the hall, I think there was 1 American, 1 Swedish girl, 1 Belgian girl, and a German girl, I think. So, it was a great place, and then people could have dinner parties, or, students could study together. So it was a great place for us to get to meet each other, because we met both there and then at the school as well. And it was walking distance, but it was a long walk. It was about 45 minutes, so you had to go, around the
circuitously, yeah.
Circumvallazione.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's fun. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and I remember Wilson Schmidt, who was our economics professor. He was a very nice man. He taught us international trade and international finance, and those were 2 very important courses in my future career.
Which we'll hear about in a minute. Yeah, that's great.
I remember the Italian. Well, there was Professor La Pergola, who was Italian. He taught United Nations and international organizations. There was Professor Grosser, Alfred Grosser, who was French. He would come down from Paris, I believe. What other? Oh, and I remember Ivano, the fellow who ran the snack bar there, because a lot of us would, if we had classes or were studying hard or something, we didn't want to go out and eat in a restaurant for lunch, so we'd go to Ivano's and just have snacks. And it was kind of in that period that Ivano's it was mostly a coffee bar when we first went there, but he adapted, and he would make salads or little sandwiches or something, and I think it just grew and grew in future years.
That's great.
Yeah, so...
Good. Well, those are fun memories.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those. And what about when you finished your first year and you came to D.C.? What was that like for you?
Well, it's the first time that I had, not the first time I'd been in D.C., but the first time I had lived in D.C., and first time I had to go out and find myself a place to live, because in university I'd lived in dormitories and in Via degli Orti in Bologna. So I was with 2 of my fellow Bologna students, Sylvia Johnstone and Elizabeth Girolat, and we decided to room together. So we looked around and we found a place, and it was on Peace Street, just really across from SAIS. The property now is part of Brookings Institution, but it was a little two-story townhouse, and we had the downstairs part, and then there were some SAIS students upstairs too, so we had a very short walk.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And do you remember courses or professors?
Well, one of my
or-
favorite professors was Isaiah Frank, who taught seminar in international trade, and he was a wonderful economist and just a wonderful person.
That's great. And were you in touch with him down the road, or?
He helped me find my first job, and not in recent years. I mean, after I went into the Foreign Service and went overseas, I don't think I really saw him much after that, but I just had the greatest respect for him, and he was a very, very nice person.
Great. Well, that's kind of probably a good segue into your career, because I actually want to hear a lot about that. I know you've done a lot of wonderful things for the world and for SAIS since then, and I just kind of want to hear a little bit about when you first started, and you mentioned he helped find you a job. What was that, and how did you start your career?
Well, my first job was in the Commerce Department, and he introduced me to a friend of his who was in, I think, one of the directors of the Office of International Regional Economics. Commerce, in those days, did a lot of publications of about foreign trade and foreign investment and tariffs and trade regulations for the business community. And I was hired in the Far Eastern Division, the Office of Trade Regulations and Tariffs. And part of my job was to write these little pamphlets on, I think I wrote one on Singapore, one on Malaysia, foreign investment climate. I wrote about trade regulations and barriers in some of the Asian countries. And then we also, in those days, I mean, no internet, no, not a whole lot of information available. We would get the tariff books from the embassies over in these countries, and then business people who wanted to know, say, what's the tariff rate for sending widgets over to Australia? And we'd look it up and write them a little letter back and tell them what it was. I mean, nowadays, it sounds very parochial.
That's terrific.
But I wanted to work overseas, and so I took the exam for the Foreign Service. And when I passed first you had to pass the written, and then you had to pass the oral. And once I had passed those, they scheduled my entry into the Foreign Service. I think it was October '67. So I went.
Congratulations! That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I went into the Foreign Service.
And thanks for serving. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And when I first went in, we didn't have to specialize, but several years later they divided the Foreign Service up into these cones, and since I had an interest in economics anyway, I went into the economics section, which SAIS, my background in SAIS and my courses and their emphasis on economics, was a big influence in that area.
Sure. And what else? Continue, because I want to hear more about your career.
Well, my first posting was Germany, and that I had kind of expressed an interest in that.
Where in Germany?
I went to Bonn. In those days, it was right at the time when we were having a lot of balance of payments problems. It was, when you go into the Foreign Service, or at least then, you would have a 3-month orientation course. And then at the end of this orientation, you would get your assignment. And then everyone had to take a consular course, too, because a lot of the junior officers had consular postings, or at least some duties at the beginning of their career. And so I went in October '67, and then by end of the year, I was ready. I'd finished all this training. I was ready to go overseas. But all of a sudden, because of the balance of payments problems, President Johnson put a hold on all positions overseas, people traveling and everything, and then they went back to the posts, and kind of one by one, the posts would say, well, we have the budget for this, or we can afford it, or we're going to eliminate that position. They were trying to eliminate some of their overseas expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the middle of the Vietnam War in those days as
Mm-hmm.
well. And
A lot going on.
a lot of people from my junior officer class went to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So
was that memorable?
Oh yes, yes. It was about the time they were having the protests. 1968.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember actually the down on the mall. I was here when they had the big anti-Vietnam protest rally.
Mm-hmm.
So about the time I went into the service, was the opposition to the war was just increasing. But most of the bachelors who came into my class were assigned to Vietnam in one or more capacities. They had a large number of people went to the Cords program.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the people who were out in the field, and it was kind of a combined AID State Department thing, but there was also a lot of CIA involvement,
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence gathering, winning the hearts and minds of the people out in the hinterlands.
Sure.
And then some of them went to Saigon, and which at that time was a huge embassy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Compare
absolutely.
Iraq today.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 40 years, the embassy, my prediction is that the embassy in Iraq will not be anywhere as big as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Just based on my experience
Sure,
with Vietnam.
right, in comparison, yeah. And then where did you go from there?
Well, Bonn decided that they could take me, and the position I had there was what was called Central Complement. It was kind of a training position, so I spent 3 months in I was supposed to spend 3 months in 4 different sections.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out in one of the economic sections. Bonn was a huge embassy,
Mm-hmm.
so the economic section had, they had the transportation section, they had the commercial section, they had one of the ones I was in, which was did the core economic reporting and analysis. I can't remember what it was called. They had a financial section which was run by a treasury officer. So I spent 3 months in the treasury, the financial section. I spent 3 months in the kind of core econ section, and 3 months in the political section.
Mm-hmm.
And my fourth assignment was supposed to be consular or admin, but the consular section was so small, they really only had one consul there, because their consular section was only Bonn and Bad Godesberg.
Right.
And so they decided to send me, they had an opening in Hamburg at
Mm-hmm.
the consulate up there, and it was an econ position. So they
Mm-hmm.
asked me if I would like to be transferred there, and I said yes. So I went up and I spent 2 years in Hamburg.
Okay, great. And how was that?
I enjoyed Hamburg. Hamburg's a beautiful city, an exciting city.
And you were there for 2 years or
I
longer?
was there for 2 years.
Okay. And then after Hamburg, where did you
After Hamburg,
relocate?
they assigned me to Lagos, Nigeria.
Oh, wow. It's a change. Yeah.
And in those days, there was no bidding or expressing any interest whatsoever in what you might want. They just said, okay, your next assignment is, and you had no
And
no
how much
choice in the
time
matter.
did you have to move? Was it like a month or something?
Well, I got
or?
home leave. I'd been 3.5 years in Germany without home leave, so I got about 9 weeks of home leave, and then I went down to Lagos in 1971.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay, and you were there for another 2 years?
I was in Nigeria for 2 years.
So all of these postings typically for you were 2 years?
At the beginning of your career, it's usually 2 years when
Okay.
you're a so-called junior officer. And
Okay.
then later on, and also in developing countries, was usually 2 years.
Okay.
And then later on...
How did you like Nigeria?
Well, there were some things I liked and some things I didn't like. Nigeria, it was kind of a rough country. There was a lot of crime there. Not nearly as bad then as it is now, but I enjoyed there's kind of a nice life in a place like that. I got to ride horses. There's tennis clubs. There was the leftovers of a colonial society were there. But it was 2 years after the Biafra War. There was still a lot of guns around, and things were a little bit tense. So it was harder to travel. They had a lot of armed robberies. You never wanted to travel at night. There was a lot of armed robberies. In fact, the day I arrived in Lagos, they were executing 3 armed robbers by firing squad on the beach.
Wow.
As they were taking me to my temporary quarters, saw all these people walking along the streets, and they were all heading to the beach. And I said, "Gee, what's going on?" It was like it was a rock concert or something. Oh, they're executing the 3 armed robbers.
Wow, unbelievable.
So.
And that was your first day there, essentially? Wow.
Day I arrived.
Wow.
But it was a little difficult to travel. It was particularly difficult getting out of Lagos because it was so populous. It's a very populous city, and a lot of the population lived there. Once you got out, I did a few trips into the countryside. I went once to the Kainji Dam, which is it's a huge dam. It was one of the 8 projects and produces a lot, or that time produced a lot of electricity for the country. And went once to Kaduna. I never went to Kano. Kano is supposed to be a very interesting city up in the north of Nigeria. And went once to the eastern border near Cameroon, and that was very pretty. But
that's great. Yeah. And then after Nigeria, where did your career take you from there?
I came back to the States, and I they had a course at the Foreign Service Institute in economics. And since I was getting well into the economic track there, I thought it would be helpful for my career to really, because my undergraduate degree was in political science, and I had never had a rigorous, basic economic training. So I took this 6-month course, which was very, very good. They started you with macro and micro and calculus and statistics and all this. I don't think they do the course anymore, but a lot of economic officers in the State Department went through it, and
Calculus.
Oh
wow.
yeah, we had calculus. Yeah. So it was very good course, and then after that I was assigned to the State Department in was the Latin American Economic Regional Office. And
so this is sort of a shift, if you will, in roles at that point? Okay.
Yeah, from being overseas. Well, in the State Department, you kind of regularly rotate, some years in the State Department, some years overseas. And though I preferred being overseas, I had to do my
duty in the
State
US,
Department
yes.
duty.
Yeah.
So that was, I was there for a couple of years, and then I was chosen to do a year of economic training at university. So I went to Princeton for a year.
Wow, that's fun.
Yes, that was very nice. I quite enjoyed that. And I went to the Woodrow Wilson School. Spent a year there, and then I went over to Athens.
Oh, wow.
And that was a 4-year assignment.
In Greece. Wow. Okay. How did you like Greece?
I love Greece, yeah. Greece was a great country. And it was very interesting at the time because it was about 2 years after the junta had fallen. I went there in 1976. Junta had fallen in 1974. You know, it'd been from 67 to 74. And so we had a small aid program there. I mean, we normally don't give foreign aid to more developed countries like Greece, but because of the circumstances and everything, they had given them, I think it was a $65 million loan. I can't remember if it was a grant or a loan. Anyway, but they didn't have any AID personnel there, so that was one of my responsibilities, is to follow the loan, you know, do all the paperwork, be in touch with the people who were in the government administering it. And Greece was also applying at the time to become a member of the EC. So that was another one of the interesting things I did. I kind of followed the negotiations.
Yeah.
There were a lot of papers written on different areas, and even though the United States was not a participant in this, you know, it was between Greece and the EC governments, nevertheless it was of interest to us because that was kind of the start of the expansion beyond the core members of the EC. And they were accepted as members about the year I left.
1980. Wow, that's great. And then where'd you go? You came back to the U.S.?
In 1980, I came back to the U.S. I spent a year on Capitol Hill on kind of an exchange we had. I worked for Jonathan Bingham, and worked in, well, he was a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he was the chairman of the Economic Policy Subcommittee. And so when you work in a congressman's office, you kind of do what they want you to do, and he wanted me to follow the authorization of the Foreign Aid Bill, which was one of the big things that the Foreign Affairs Committee did in those days. So I got involved in some of the amendments. In those days, one of the big issues was El Salvador. You know, they were having the civil war down in El Salvador, and the nuns had been murdered, and people were very concerned about giving money and weapons, not having it get into the wrong hands. You know, there was a lot of bad actors down there. So when the Congress, you know, does the foreign aid authorization, they often put strings on certain countries.
Sure.
Earmarks and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting working for a year on the Hill.
And then
I came back to the department, and I was in management operations, which was, well, it was different for me because it wasn't economic, it was management. But, you know, they were saying, well, you have to do different things in order to get into the upper ranks of the Foreign Service. So I did 2 years in a management office.
And then did you get to where you wanted to go?
Well, after that, I was assigned as economic counselor to Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Yeah. That's great.
And I love Sri Lanka, but that was also, to go over there, I went over in July of 1983, and I stopped off in Hong Kong for a few days. I thought for a few days, just to break the trip, because I had gone through California, you know, to see my parents before going over. And the day I was supposed to fly into Colombo, they closed the airport because it was just the start of that insurgency, you know, the Tamils and the Sinhalese, and it was kind of the last Sinhalese Tamil bashing rampage, and really terrible. I mean, the Sinhalese would pull Tamils out of their cars, and they'd pour gasoline on them and set them on fire, and they burned Tamil shops, and they chopped them up with machetes, and so, you know, there was so much chaos that they declared a curfew and they closed all the airports. So I called over to the embassy from Hong Kong and they said, just stay in Hong Kong till we tell you to come. And fortunately, there was a friend at the consulate in Hong Kong that I knew. I was with another friend. And so they put us up for a week, and then about a week later they opened the airport and I was able to fly in. But it was under very heavy curfew for a number of months.
And what year was that?
1983.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So,
and then you were in Sri Lanka for
I was in Sri Lanka for 3 years.
3 years,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
83 to 86. And the insurgency got steadily worse in that period. And of course, it just about a year ago was solved. So it went on for, 27 years.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a pity because they were doing so well. It's a very nice country. The people seem so nice, and they had a lot of foreign aid. All the donors were there at the time. The Americans, the Swedes, the Germans, the Dutch, the Canadians, the British. Everyone was giving them foreign aid. It was flowing in. They were building a big dam. And for water management and things like that. But it just progressively got worse, and I think they've been set back at least 30 years.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. Did you make it up to Kandy while you were there?
Oh yeah, Kandy was always easy. I went almost everywhere. I did go up to Jaffna before they closed down Jaffna. I went to Trincomalee. When I first arrived, they were just recovering from this Sinhalese rampage.
Right.
But the Tamils hadn't started their rampages yet. They were just getting themselves together. So we were able to travel in most parts of the country. But a couple of years later, you couldn't go to Trincomalee. You had to be very careful. I went to Wilpatu, which is one of the 2 game parks there. I love the game parks. And the elephants. And,
it's like some big safari experience,
But the Tamil insurgents at one time had taken over Wilpatu, so you really couldn't go there. It just progressively got worse. It's kind of like guerrilla warfare, really.
And then after your 3-year stay there, did you come back to the U.S. for a while? Or?
No, I went to Jamaica.
Oh, wow. Again, another change. Yeah.
And Jamaica was my last post. I was there for 3 years. And actually, I was there for 4 years. But the last year I was there was after I retired. I retired in 89. And then I was hired by USAID for a year. And that was good because I had applied to law school. I retired and I had decided I wanted to, try to do a second career. So I applied to law school and was able to defer my law school so I could earn some money to pay for it.
That's great. And then did you end up going to law school? Where did you go?
I went to Georgetown.
Oh, wow. Right down the road here.
Well, they're over there.
Yeah.
They're on the east side of the Washington,
That's great. And what years was that?
I went 1990 to 93.
Okay, great.
So, and that's when I came back to D.C. And I've more or less stayed here ever since.
How did you like law school after your foreign service
experience?
school.
I really enjoyed law school. I kind of wish I had done law school before I went into the Foreign Service. It would have been things like treaties and a lot of our foreign policy, law and international law is a very important part. And although you pick up things, it's helpful to really have a strong grounding in it. And as you may know, a lot of Foreign Service officers do have law degrees.
You might argue, though, too, that having gone when you did, you knew what to look for more because you had the practical experience going into it. So it's interesting to kind of have the reverse order of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then did you practice law after?
After I graduated, I worked full-time for Morgan, Lewis, and Bacchius for a few years. Until, well, then things that happen in your later years happened. My husband died, and then my mother had a stroke, and so
Family came into play. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I still work kind of on a contract basis for
Sure.
Morgan Lewis.
Okay, so you kind of take cases as they
Yeah, I
arrive.
do little projects and things that the time that is useful to them and that I have the time to do. And so
That's great. Well, super. And now here you are living in Georgetown, and you've kind of come full circle. And I guess my question is, and thanks again for all you've done. But what would you, given all your wonderful experiences, what advice might you have for current students today? And do you see it as anything different than what you would have done, or would you kind of done the same?
Well, the world has really changed since I went to SAIS starting in 1964, as you can imagine. I mean, the technology, the communications. So it's kind of hard to base a career today on my career 40, 50 years ago. Well, 40, not quite that old. But I guess I would tell them the most important thing is to do what you enjoy doing. The reason I went into the Foreign Service is because I enjoyed going overseas. I wanted to live overseas. I wanted to meet people in other countries. I was interested in policy, but if you really want to affect policy, you have to be in politics. You don't really affect much policy when you're in the Foreign Service. You help to implement policy. But if you really want to affect it, you have to be a politician, because more and more the decisions are made here in Washington. With the more rapid communications, ambassadors, I don't think, have as much freedom as they used to have. They're more carrying out policy than they are implementing it. And in a way it's a pity, because the Foreign Service has very good people. I think one of the interesting things that came out of WikiLeaks is people said, oh, well, gee, they're kind of smart, the people who wrote these cables. Unlike, I guess, the common perception of State Department, Foreign Service officers. But it's a great career in that you do get to do a lot of interesting things, and you do get to live in a country. And it's a lot different to live in a country than it is to visit. You can take a trip and go over take a cruise or, backpack around, but it's not the same as living there and making friends and experiencing, getting involved maybe in reading their papers and knowing what's on their minds, and that's important.
Great.
So.
Well, thank you so much, Dorothy, for your time, and we really appreciate you, hearing your stories, and thanks for all you've done, and I look forward to being in touch with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I wish all of the SAIS students wonderful careers, and I'm sure they will have it. It's a great school. And
Great.
It helped me a lot.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.